and welcome back to our next episode of Big Data Talks, in which we have conversations with industry experts about the way in which data, machine learning, and artificial intelligence are changing the way we live. My name is Jan-Willem, and I will be your host today. I'm the author of the Enterprise Big Data Framework, which is hosting this series of Big Data Talks. You can always watch back this recording on the YouTube platform, Apple Podcasts, and nowadays on Spotify. Today, I have the great pleasure to welcome Bitthal Khaitan, a senior cloud engineer at CVS Health based in Dallas, Texas. CVS Health is a prominent Fortune 4 healthcare provider in the United States. With more than 12 years of experience, Bitthal has played a pivotal role in driving cloud data-driven initiatives using versatile technology stacks from Google Cloud, Teradata, Hadoop, Spark, Scala, and Python. Before his tenure at CVS, Bitthal spent 8 years at Tata Consultancy Services, Asia's largest IT company, as a data engineer, where he collaborated with Fortune 500 companies like Walmart, Cigna Healthcare, DaVita Kidney Care, and Kaiser Foundation Hospitals. Bitthal holds a bachelor degree in computer science engineering from West Bengal University, and he is an esteemed member of different technology organizations around the world. Additionally, Bitthal is very active on social media, has a lot of followers on LinkedIn, and that's definitely something that we're going to talk about today. Bitthal, it's really a pleasure to welcome you on Big Data Talks. I really look forward to talking to you.
Hey, thank you, Jan. Thank you so very much.
Good. Let me quickly start and fire off. You know that in this show, we kind of take a deep dive into people's careers. How did they get to where they are today? So can you tell us a little bit around your journey on how you became a CVS Health senior cloud data engineer? And for people who have no idea what cloud engineering is, just also explain us a little bit around what that is.
So firstly, I would thank you for inviting me to this podcast and, giving me an opportunity to speak about myself, my work, and my journey. And absolutely big thanks for this generous and kind introduction. Okay. So I started with CVS around 5.5 years back in July 2018. So prior to that, like you said, I was with TCS. It's an Asia's largest company, IT services company. So I was that point of time working on Hadoop, Spark, big data, and then CVS was having an initiative to move their data warehouse into a data lake. So they have it on Teradata, so they were moving it to Hadoop. So before I go deeper, I would like to call out that whatever I'm speaking has nothing to do with my employer. The views are my own, and everything has nothing to do with my employer.
Absolutely.
So when I got hired, I was helping them migrate from Teradata to Hadoop Spark. And eventually in 2020, the enterprise decided to move to cloud. And we have a multi-cloud approach where half of the company is on Microsoft Azure and half of it is in Google Cloud. I am in a division which is on Google Cloud. And my expertise certification last 3 to 3 years have been mostly on Google Cloud. So this is how I consider myself very lucky to be a part of a Fortune 4 organization. And CVS Health is the leading healthcare company in United States.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So we discussed before, I lived in the US for a while. And there's absolutely no way you can get around CVS. They're literally on the corner of every street nowadays.
Yeah. So post-COVID, if everybody knows CVS, 1/3 of the population of United States visit us every year. So that's the power of CVS.
Yeah,
so that's how from 2020, from a data engineer, I became a cloud data engineer because migrating to cloud, creating pipelines on cloud started 2-3 years back.
Yeah, so we're absolutely going to dive a little bit deeper into that because I'm very interested to learn a little bit more around that. And also from a CVS point of view, if you mention those numbers, I can only start to imagine the amount of data that generates on a daily basis. It must be almost incomprehensible in terms of the numbers.
So although I cannot give you the real numbers, but I would just give you one heads up that we have 110 million combined patient members, and we have various touch point: insurance, claims, pharmacy, benefit management, pharmacy. So at a normal day, if I'm dealing with a table, its size could vary from 4 GB to 4 PB. Okay, so that's what I like to call it, 4 GB to 4 PB.
Wow, that's an almost incomprehensible amount of data.
Yep.
So you just mentioned that you are, I would say, skilled and I would say leading in the data engineering field. And
Mhm.
there's always a lot of talk these days, especially if you open up any website, it's always around data science, data engineering, and data analysis. Where does the role of a data engineer differ from that of a data scientist, for example?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So, see, these three roles, they coexist. You cannot have a company just have data engineers and not have data science, data analyst. It's like, and the other way around as well. You cannot have a data analyst and without having a data engineer.
Hmm.
So any data driven company or a data driven project has to have these three: data analyst, or some people like to call them data analytics professional, data analytics engineer, data engineer, and data science. So as a data engineer, I would say I would consider data analysts my customers and data scientists as my customers.
That's a
So
very good description. Yeah.
yeah, so if I split them, okay, so pre 2020 or pre COVID, our majority of the customers were data analysts. Okay, we would create pipelines on a data platform, be it a data warehouse, data lake, and the data analysts used to consume that data, or the BI analysts would consume that data, create reports, or derive some basic insights. Post COVID, and with the more of AI, machine learning, DS, our most of the customers are data scientists with whom we collaborate. Okay, and our job primarily is to give the right data in the right format with the right refresh. That's it. A data scientist, or data analyst, if you have to create a report, or be analyst, they would know the the cosmetic part of that, but
Yeah.
behind the scenes, we are the ones who get the data from the different sources to them, and we ensure that the data quality is good, refresh is good, and they can rely on something. So this, basically, it's like, yeah, it's like completely, uh, making giving them raw data or sometimes aggregated data. That way they can do their magic, or they can do their
Yeah.
science on that.
That's very interesting. Could I say, if I kind of summarize that
Hmm.
if if you say that data analysts and data scientists are your customers, that is more, I would say, a business focus, whereas engineering is more on an IT focus. Would that be a way to differentiate?
I would say both yes and no, because nowadays the structure is changing. When I say the structure is changing, people are working in an agile pod manner, where
Okay.
if you're solving a business problem, a data science or data analyst is tagged to that business problem, and he or she will rely on the data engineer for all the data activities, getting them the data. And especially for POC, I would say, be the exploratory, the first stage, where they decide to do something, they want to play around stuff, so doing one time history loads and all those things, ensuring that what they are even planning can be done. We are the first ones to go ahead and create the pipelines.
Yeah. So I would say without a data engineer, there's no data pipelines to,
Yeah,
to,
we,
to
we
get
actually
started with.
coexist, and
Yeah.
there is no point if I create a pipeline and nobody's consuming it. So if my
Yeah.
data analyst or data science is not scientist is not using it, I am kind of useless. And the
Yeah, I
other way
can
around
imagine
too.
that. So we always try to go a little bit more in depth. You mentioned the word
Sure.
data pipeline a couple of times. For everyone who's completely unaware of that term, so what is a data pipeline exactly? How do you define that?
Yeah. So
And also, how do you build something that is able to deal with that massive quantity of data that you
mhm.
just talked about?
That's a really relevant question. So, so data pipeline, the word pipeline, I think it came into focus in the last 4 or 5 years. Okay, it always, the data workflow always existed. We had all the ETL jobs, we had all the transformations, we had all the ingestion frameworks. But recently, what I see, people are calling it pipelines. So when we say pipelines, because we are using a lot of coding Python. Earlier, 5 year, 10 years back, it used to be always SQL. You would use an Informatica, you would use a data stage or ab initio to get what you're doing now from just a structured format, file format using SQL.
Yeah, I
Now
remember
we
those
have
days.
SQL, Python, Scala. I mean, the pipelines have become more complex. Okay, we need to. So this data pipeline. So when we so this is a very broad question. I would say, creating a data pipeline. So I would simply say, so data pipeline is nothing like your gas pipeline or water pipeline. Okay, it has different kind of nodes, and everything is driven by business need.
Okay.
So a business need starts it, business needs ends it.
So does that mean that through that pipeline you're ingesting data from various sources, or do you
Mhm.
primarily try to focus around one source only? How do you structure that?
Okay. So, for example, if I have a need, for example, today my company, for example, they want to figure out which touch points my customer is coming. Okay. My company would have 10 different subsidiaries. Okay.
Yeah.
So I might go to one subsidiary company to pull the data. So there are different concepts, you can pull the data, you can push the data. There are different concepts of ingestion in a pipeline. Okay. The very first step of a pipeline is to read the data from somewhere. Okay.
Yeah.
That somewhere could be anything, depending whether it's internal, external. For example, very simple example, I would say if it's within the company, we call it internal. Outside the company, external. External
Yeah.
being, getting weather data. Okay. Or getting data via APIs for Experian, to figure out a credit score of a person, things like that. So that data, we can pull via APIs, we can pull via flight files. Similarly, the beginning of pipeline can connect to a RDBMS, can connect to anything. So it is not necessary in today's world to be a structured data set, but it can be even unstructured. It can be audio file nowadays, So a lot of things, what we talk about today, 2023, existed 10 years back, but those things were simpler, limited file structures. But now I think it has become pretty complex because of the variety of data that is being generated.
You previously mentioned that when you moved to CVS, that they started to build a data warehouse and transfer that into a data lake.
Mm-hmm.
If I relate that to the pipelines that you've been talking to,
Mm-hmm.
would you say that most of the pipelines are moving data into the data lake, or is it the other way around? Do most of the pipelines extract data from the data lake?
Okay. So a data lake, most of the pipelines would feed the data into the data lake. Okay.
Into it, yeah,
But that is not the end of story. Okay. We need to have consumers consuming that. So what happens in any enterprise, not just my company, any enterprise, what they would do is they would do all the heavy processing on the data lake, and then there would be export jobs. For example, I might export a set of data to the customer's mobile app. That
okay,
is one use case. Then if my report is running, it's a batch report, I would like to push it to the reporting, application. So if I'd say ingestion is the bulk part and consumption is the secondary.
yeah. Can imagine though that consumption is starting to get more focused because customers are going to demand more
Mhm.
data and more data exchanges. Is that correct?
Yes, but the only concern customers have when they demand data from a data lake is the quality of data.
Yeah,
Okay. They have been used to the data warehouse structures, the data warehouse formatting, everything. So what they want is companies, large enterprises, they start building data lake, but they end up building data warehouses
yeah,
because the reports that used to run, that are running from 20 years. Okay. So we have, for example, a report running from 2002. Today, if I want to migrate that report to a data lake or say, for example, cloud environment, my customer would, the first thing would want is, I don't want the cosmetics, I want the data to match. Okay.
yeah,
So that is the biggest thing I've seen, that consumption is increasing, and more so not just by the reporting community, but by this all this AI/ML use cases, edge computing use cases, and especially the digital impact that we have seen in COVID, where even 80, 85 year old people are starting to use a mobile phone, and they want their treatment or they want their stuff to be done digitally. So all that data is kind of sometimes fed from your data lake directly.
That's very interesting. So what you mentioned, and it really got my attention, is obviously customers are going to be concerned around quality, formatting. They might have completely different data structures or work with different data structures than you would have internally.
Mm-hmm.
Also, the sources that you mentioned. Let's again use the weather data that you just referenced. That might also have a completely different format, different structure. So at an organization of the scale that you are working at, probably does not get much larger than that in the world. How do you deal with that differences in formats, structures, different ways that the data needs to be transported? Do you have kind of like an enterprise-wide uniform way in which you deal with this is the format that we
Mm-hmm.
use, and this is the validation rules or specific
Sure.
transformation that we are using internally? How do you deal with that?
Yeah. So I would say not just any large company with different departments and a company which is growing. For example, my company acquires a pharmacy. Okay.
Hmm.
That pharmacy might not be having the standards which I follow. Okay. They could be using data collection, a database which my company might not have ever heard of. For
Yeah,
example, no, they could still be on an Oracle 99 or something. I'm just giving a random example.
yeah, that's a good one.
So yeah, so what happens? In the context of a data lake, what you do is when you're building a data lake, you first ensure that you get the data in the raw format, whatever it is. If it's a DB2 system, it's a flat file. If it's a SQL server, whatever it is, you get that into your data lake. So their data lake also has different layers. Raw layer, staging layer, processing layer, then the consumption layer. It depends on how it's designed. So first you bring all of them, you bring the data in the raw layer as it is without, doing any magic on that. Then what you do is you have certain enterprise standards. Okay. For example, today, if somebody's date of birth, a pretty simple basic example, if the
Yeah,
date of birth is not in the right format, okay, so we have a standard format where we transform the date of birth into a YYY hyphen DDMMY, things like that.
yeah,
Same thing with address. Okay, if the address is a 9-digit zip code in US, we have 5 digits mandatory, and then sometimes we have additional 4 digits. So we had certain validation rules, where if anything is coming up, we need to standardize that or we need to confirm that.
yeah.
Where it
And
could be
that's
as
used enterprise-wide. Sorry for interrupting, but
yes,
so whole CVS, no matter where the date of birth,
yes,
is going to
we
have that
aim to
that
do
format.
that. So the data is not always clean. Okay, the data is not always structured. Whatever it comes, what we try to do is we have certain rules, and that's what we implement in our pipelines. Okay. Say, for example, somebody's gender, a gender field could be, if you have not defined it correctly, it could be somebody could put it as single character MF undefined, somebody could write male, somebody could write it female. I mean, it varies. So when a centralized data lake or a centralized cloud data warehouse is built, these are the things that, and it's not a one time activity, it's a continuous iterative activity for any new source that comes in. So today, if my company acquires another pharmacy, okay, and we decide that, okay, they are on a system, now we need to we ingest that data, we transform it, and then we make it available for processing, all the business logic, and then we do
Mhm.
reporting on top of it.
Wow. So across the all the different branches, this is the same. And as soon as you integrate, let's say, a new pharmacy, you're going to transfer that as well.
Yeah.
So it makes me wonder, the standards that you just mentioned, is that based on, do you follow some kind of international, let's say, ISO standard or a
Yeah.
specific formatting that you've
Mhm.
embraced or adopted? Or is this something that kind of grew over time to say, well, now this is the CVS way of doing things?
So there are two ways to look at it. One is we do have certain standards that we have learned over time, 30, 40 years of
Mhm.
journey. They have come up with the standard best practices for data integration or data transformation. But in certain cases where our data needs to interact with data of another hospital or be it another pharmacy, Then we have certain healthcare specific interoperability APIs and data structures that we need to follow. So this is
Yeah.
where the basic difference come. Like I said, everything is business driven. Okay, if I know that this data has to be exported out, then this data has to be in this format. If it's going to a pharmacy, then we have a separate contract and we send them into this format. So to answer you, we have both. And for internal systems, we kind of have figured out the best way after being so many years. And for exposing to the external world, we have the standards that has been defined by the healthcare industries. If you read about fire interoperability, HL7, HL5, you'll come to know more about healthcare standards.
Good. Well, we're definitely going to put the link to that on the word, because we probably would need another hour to go into standards like that.
Yeah.
Let me then move towards one of the things that you mentioned around the storage aspect.
Mm-hmm.
So at the start, you mentioned that those data pipelines are ultimately used internally to come up into two cloud environments. You mentioned that you have a multi-cloud solution incorporated.
Mm-hmm.
If you think around a way, and it does not need to be CVS specifically, but suppose somebody's listening and says, well, I would like to also
Mm-hmm.
upgrade or design a new data lake, and I would like to have that into a appropriate cloud solution. What would be your advice for choosing the most appropriate storage solution in
Mm-hmm.
this day and age? So specifically things that are going to be future proof from 2023 or onwards.
So I would say I would first go to public cloud. So if somebody is
Okay.
building something, the first approach in today's world, 2023 and onwards, is cloud upwards and cloud onwards. I like to call that. And
Cloud
since
upwards and cloud onwards. That's
okay,
that might be the
so
tagline for this podcast.
yeah, that's I like to call, and more specifically, I'm into GCP. Like I love GCP because I have more hands on there. Every day morning when I log in, the GCP console is in front of my eyes. Okay.
Yeah.
So I would go with, so there are various kind of storages. The best part of cloud is they take care of all these things. Okay. If I need to dump 4 terabyte of data today, I have a S3 storage, or, GCS bucket. S3 is in Amazon. I
Mm-hmm.
have a GCS bucket where I just don't need to think. I will first ingest that 4 terabyte and I'll dump it. Now I can keep that data 4 terabyte, and then I can think about processing it later, how to process, how to split. So first thing is you need to determine what kind of storage you need. Okay, it's all use case driven. For example, a healthcare use case. Some of the data by law we need to archive for 7 years.
Okay.
Okay. So if I keep the same data in BigQuery, it could cost me more. I could take it out, compress, and keep it in my GCS buckets. And for a cold end storage, then I would save a lot of money on that.
Yeah.
And data of it doesn't, for small scale companies, it might not make a difference, but with the data quantity is in terabytes, petabytes, it makes a huge difference. Number one. Number two, what kind of analytics are you expecting to do? Okay, if you are planning to use analytics, then you have analytics specific data warehouse solutions, analytics solutions like BigQuery. Now
Yeah.
you want to do your OLTP there. For example, a company, a small retailer might want to host their application on GCP. They would want to go with a Cloud SQL or Cloud Spanner approach. So we have different kinds of approach depending on what is the business use case. ML AI use cases would be mostly focused around GCS as storage and BigQuery and the Vertex AI. Whereas if somebody wants to really focus on building things for mobile games or transactions and all, they can go for Big Table. So there are with each passing day, all these public cloud vendors, they're competing with each other. They are improving their storage
Yeah.
capabilities and coming up with more options. What I see,
Could I say that then storage is kind of use case specific,
yes,
and that
yes,
there's not just one best solution, but it's going to
yeah,
be different depending on
correct.
use case?
See, if I have audio data, like audio file, I cannot go and put that into a BigQuery, BigQuery table, I can put in a GCS bucket. Okay,
Yeah.
so and lot depends on how you consume it as well. Okay, so you can go and put that, but if you're not able to consume, then it's of no use.
Yeah.
And one thing I have seen in data driven industry is not just getting the data, you need to define a life cycle, that how long you need to retain that data. And for example, a lot of data needs to be encrypted. So certain cloud providers, they have what they call data at rest encryption. Okay,
Mhm.
so the
Tell
data
me a
at,
little bit more about that. What is that?
yeah, so I will give in context. From example, this solution was implemented by AWS last year, but BigQuery had this for a long time. So the data at rest, when the data is lying in the database, it is always encrypted. Okay, so if you Google that, you will see that GCP was one of the first ones which implemented the data at rest encryption. So data at motion, when you're ingesting it or when you're sending it outside, then you have to encrypt it separately. But
Okay.
with the keys, Google managed keys, customer managed keys, the data always in BigQuery is encrypted. That's what, and GCS too.
Very interesting. Um, if you look at that security aspect, because you
Hmm.
mentioned the first thing just said is I would always recommend nowadays, 2023 and onwards, cloud upwards and onwards, go for a public cloud environment. There's still a lot of people that are concerned around security safety aspects
Hmm.
around that. Is that in this day and age still an issue? The security aspects. Do we still need to tackle that, or do you say, by this time, this security discussion around cloud
Hmm.
environments is basically over?
That's a good question. So I would like to see in cloud, we have three different kinds of versions. Okay. Not versions, I would say implementations. One is hybrid cloud,
Mhm.
where people still keep some of their data in their private cloud, which is their own data centers. They send some to a public cloud. The second one being multi cloud, people would say, okay, I would host some of my data in Azure, some of my data in GCP for various reasons. And the third one being completely public cloud to one vendor. Okay, now this concern regarding data is not data security is not new. Okay, it's been in past, it's been in there. Otherwise, I believe all the companies would have been completely on cloud. Okay,
Yeah, correct.
but I believe there are very few companies. I know Capital One is one of them, which is completely on cloud. Like their OLTP systems, OLAP systems, anything and everything is on cloud. AWS, I believe. But other companies, they still have a Hadoop implementation. They still are not completely into cloud. Okay.
Hmm.
So this is where I see the main difference. And when I talk to people in the industry, they have that concern that, I am sending my private data to a public cloud. How secure is that?
Yeah.
So if you see all these cloud vendors, they have come up with industry specific APIs, I would say, or solutions to, address these fears. So there are a lot of, I would say, yeah, there are companies and there are certain legal requirements as well, where you cannot send data outside, say, a particular geography. Or,
Sure.
each country have their own limitations. That is why people, if you see companies, public cloud vendors like AWS, GCP, they are creating more data centers in those geographies, where, for example, India, Asia, where they have restrictions that certain data sets, for example, the government of India data set cannot move out of the India
Yeah.
data center, right? Same thing, government of Malaysia would say that, my data has to reside in Malaysia. So to
Absolutely.
address that, there are many ways you can do it. There are third-party encryption masking providers where you implement their UDFs and the data get masked and encrypted. And even nowadays, cloud vendors themselves are coming up with solutions. Even Google has very good solutions for data security.
Yeah. No, it's always a fascinating discussion, and the reason I kind of bring it up is because in the old days, and with old days I mean, let's say 7 8 years ago, I
Hmm.
remember the days that, especially with customers, the security aspect was always the number one concern when people started to talk
No,
about
it
cloud.
is still, especially in, I would say the industry is so driven. Like everybody in United States, you have been to United States, right? Anybody and everybody can go and sue anybody, right? So
Yeah,
people are
correct.
so afraid that if my data gets leaked, for example, today, if my banking transactions get leaked from cloud for any reason, okay,
Yeah.
it was hacked, then I would be sued. The company can have, the individuals, any individual can go and sue a public, and they could get, millions of dollars in fine. And we have seen this in past. So
Yeah.
cyber attacks and all these are actually, still a concern, and it all depends on the size of the organization and the industry.
Would you say that the I would say suing culture, which is very specific to the United States, less in Europe and also definitely less in Asia Pacific, would you say that that's a driving force behind those security concerns?
Maybe, but I think it's more of the regulations that,
Okay.
especially in the healthcare industry, there are a lot of regulations, there are a lot of contracts that, for example, a company like any healthcare company would have signed with their customer, okay, that
Yeah.
you take my insurance and your data is safe with me.
Yeah.
But then you want to upgrade to cloud, you need to have their permission, and then
Yeah.
your client is not happy saying, okay, 5 years back you promised me that my data is safe with you. And what I'm saying is actual, I cannot tell the name of the clients or
Yeah. Yeah.
anything,
Sure.
but this is what has happened in past with us as well. Like, we know that this data, if it needs to go to cloud, it needs x number of approvals, and we need to convince them that this data is secure.
Correct. Yeah. So what always fascinates me in that discussion is that the knowledge and capabilities that you need in order to keep that security to the latest standards,
Hmm.
especially given the cyber attacks that you just mentioned, they are becoming more and more advanced. The people who do this kind of work also become smarter. It's more organized. It's more targeted. So just to keep a team that is knowledgeable and up to date with all of those latest attack patterns and specific ways in which they could try to target your data.
Hmm.
That alone takes investments in terms of the people, training, upskilling. So, are we at the point where even if you're a large bank or insurance provider or pharmacy, that having the skills to secure that from a security perspective,
Hmm.
is it not just better to kind of hand that over to the Googles and the Amazons of this world that have that massive capabilities and the teams that are able to safeguard that?
So, so this is again an advantage of cloud, if I would say, if
Yeah, correct.
properly implemented security features. If
Yeah,
somebody can prove that over 5 years I have had zero cybersecurity incidents, okay, that gives confidence. If I am a CTO of a company, for example,
yeah,
if you come and say to me that 5 years in my public cloud I have zero incidents of security, I would have more trust in you. So that is where it begins. But again, a lot of industry regulations around, if you, the payment card industry, there are so many regulations. In
yeah,
healthcare, we have the PHI, regulations, PII regulations. HIPAA drives a lot of things. On the banking side, you have SOX for audit. So a lot
yeah,
of things are still, what do I say, they are not very naive, but we are looking at maturity. We are still maturing with time.
yeah. So over time, hopefully, we'll
Yeah.
get to a
And we
higher
have
level.
actually many third party tools, I would say. Voltage is one. Um, so if you want to encrypt something, right, you have to hash it. So
Yeah,
there are different kind of providers also that have come into this business over the last few years, knowing that these are the challenges that needs to be addressed.
yeah. So let's talk about the future a little bit, and especially around the trends that you are seeing. You're very close to the fire, obviously.
Mhm.
How is cloud changing in the next few years, and then also maybe specifically to healthcare industry? Do you see any major developments coming your way for which you feel that organizations need to start preparing?
Yeah. So, firstly, cloud is going to be everywhere, not just healthcare industry. I think everybody is going to adopt. Um, Reason being, it is going to make organizations more agile. Okay, the kind
Yeah,
of cloud native services that are coming. Okay, take for an example, Google Vertex AI. Okay, the kind of offerings it has to assist an AI ML engineer. Okay, that is unparalleled. Number one. Number two, the ease of doing. Okay, earlier if I had to do train some model or do stuff like machine learning, data science, I had to write a Python code, take flat
Yeah.
files. I can do the same thing on my already existing data in BigQuery. Okay, so
Yeah.
BigQuery is an analytics appliance or analytics data warehouse with ML capabilities. So I
Mhm.
can train models. I can implement those models on a BigQuery data set itself, which is in an RDBMS format. So
Mhm.
the more the cloud offerings come into picture, okay, the more industries are going to adopt it. Now, coming specifically to healthcare, okay, so healthcare has its own set of problems in US because it's a lot of that, because the federal government here is a big payer. They pay for
Yeah.
the Medicaid, Medicare services, so they drive a lot of things in decision making. That's number one. Number two is the services. Okay, the cloud services, not just limited to data engineering, the other components as well.
Mhm.
So what all cloud providers are doing, they are getting into the healthcare services. They want to provide services which will help the healthcare industries. Like you can see all this MLAI services. We are seeing a lot of edge computing also.
Yeah.
Where you can when you are taking the blood pressure of the patient, you can immediately tell whether this person is hypertensive or not, and what medication can be given.
Yeah.
Similarly, uh, during the immediate diagnosis, to predict, okay, whether this person can this medication will interfere or not. So there are a lot of use cases, but these are mostly driven by, I would say, the data underneath that.
It's a very interesting thing that you're bringing up. So, if you take that example about hypertension or making some kind of a predictive model that kind of predicts if there's a
Mhm.
certain disease, my mind starts wondering: does that mean that the people involved with IT, like engineers like yourself or other more data scientists, basically means that they also need to start to obtain business knowledge and understand, what are the
Mhm.
effects of specific medicines on specific diseases. So, means that from a knowledge point of view, they should become involved more with the medicine part and the doctor's traditional knowledge around how diseases operate and function. Do
Absolutely
you see
not.
that as a trend that we
No,
that
no,
you need to get
absolutely
more?
not. But
Okay.
as a data guy, data engineer, I would say if you know the business, if you know the customer. So in
Uh-huh.
the beginning of the interview, you asked me, right, how CVS Cloud Data Engineer happened. So because I had worked for my TCS clients in past, which were all US healthcare giants, so I know how the US healthcare industry works. And
Okay.
anybody and everybody who is in US and has gone to any other part of the world would know that this healthcare industry is so different than the rest of the world. It's so
Uh-huh.
expensive, it's so bureaucratic. So, and there are a lot of standards to it. So, what would happen is, I would say, if I know the business well, if I know the logic, how when I go and talk to a pharmacist, I try to know their pain points. Okay, and when
Uh-huh.
I'm designing a system, it helps me if I know the domain. So that data model, whenever you build a data model in the data engineering pipeline, we have several steps. Data modeling is also one of them, where you have to create the target table model, physical model, logical model. That is
Yeah.
where it helps me. And if I can talk a language, if my pharmacist is saying, "Hey, Bital, this report is not giving me the revenue for, or something like for this NDC," if I know an NDC means National Drug Code, or if I
Mm-hmm.
if I if I see a report where it says NPI is blank, if I know NPI stands for National Pharmacist ID or Provider ID, so
Mm-hmm.
that aspect would help me and augment in my work. Similarly, in the cloud data engineering industry, what I'm seeing is they want to enable people with business knowledge. For example, somebody who is a clinical researcher, okay,
Mm-hmm.
they want themselves to do a lot of stuff instead of going to a data scientist.
No.
Okay, for example, clinical trials. Take a very simple example. If I want to do clinical trials, I want to have an inclusive population. I just don't want to do it on the majority of the population. I want to do it inclusively. So my drug is working on everybody.
Yeah.
But how do I do that? How do I identify uh, who are those prospective people from all the different ethnicity, age group, gender to target.
Yeah.
So I would say domain knowledge is additionally helpful, but you don't need to think like that.
That's okay. Good. So that's one step too far. That's good to know.
Yeah.
Um, so how do you see and to kind of follow, because one of the key things that we're always trying to establish with this podcast is to kind of help people understand a little bit around how data and machine learning and all the new technology is changing the way that we live.
Hmm.
And how do my next question is, how do you see the role of the data engineer evolving?
Hmm.
And especially if I were to be, let's say, somebody, I'm in university or school right now, and I have this aspiration to become the next famous data engineer, what would be key focal points? Because I fully agree with you. It's not SQL only anymore.
Yeah, that's a very, very good question, actually.
That was when we, or at least when I started learning, that was,
Yeah,
if you knew
this is a
SQL, you were
frequently
fine.
asked question, Jan. I would say this is a frequently asked question I get from a lot of school
Yeah.
grads, that how do they aim to become a data engineer? I just said them three
Yeah.
things. One is you
What's your
need,
advice?
yeah, one is you need to know SQL and Python. Okay, the reason
Okay.
is that is your base.
Hmm.
Without that, and why a reason I say Python and not Scala, because Python is used everywhere and anywhere. Okay, you
Hmm.
Scala, I would use Scala mostly when I'm working on Spark. Okay,
Yeah.
Scala has its own inherent advantage of being, Spark was written on Scala. If you don't know, I mean, if people don't
Yeah.
know, Spark itself is written in Scala. Okay, so when I have to run something on Spark, if I use Scala, then it becomes more compatible and it runs faster. But when I have to work on an Airflow, okay, job or a Cloud Composer, it ends up with Python. If I have to do some quick scripting, it ends up with Python. So I always tell people that SQL and Python has to be good. Okay, there is
Yeah.
no compromise on that. That's why if you see a lot of companies that interview in United States, I don't know about other job markets, the first thing that they try to check is how good this person is with SQL and Python.
Yeah.
The reason being SQL, it has been for the last 20, 30 years. It will be there for the next 20, 30 years. There is no denying, okay? SQL is still your best friend for any data engineer, data scientist, and data analytics guy, BI guy, to talk to anybody. They would be doing some SQL every day. That is number one.
Yeah.
Number two, like I said, Python, okay? Some people want to focus on other languages. They are good, but no matter how much you avoid, you will have to do Python coding, okay? Now, second thing, most like I said, cloud onwards, cloud upwards. You have to choose one cloud and you have to make it your expertise. I preferably go for GCP because GCP has come late into the game, so they are growing more. Okay,
Yeah.
there are many AWS consultants in the market, many Azure guys, but you will find very few GCP folks. Okay, and as the GCP market is growing, I tell people you should go for GCP,
Okay.
GCP, and GCP. So that is one certification I recommend to them, that you should go for any GCP certification, not just, not just a data engineer. There are many other options if somebody wants to go for a DevOps. But as I expertise on data engineering, I tell them to go for GCP professional data engineer.
Yeah.
The third thing is you need to know Spark. 2023, 2022, or any, going forward, at least next 5 years, Spark is not going anywhere. Okay, Spark will
Yeah.
be there. All the majority of this huge terabytes, petabytes of data will be processed using Spark. You can have different flavors. You can have Databricks, managed service. You
Yeah.
can have serverless GCP. You can have data proc. You can have many things. But eventually, majority of the companies who want to use big data, they have to use Spark.
Yeah.
Now, for Spark, I recommend people doing the Databricks Spark certification, be it a Python or Scala, depending on somebody's preference. If somebody is coming from a Java background, I recommend them to go for Scala. That's why it's
Okay.
easier. Somebody who is very new, like I know people who have no programming background, still they want to become a data engineer. So what I recommend them is you go for the Databricks Python version. That way you learn some Python and you learn a lot of Spark. So if they
Yeah.
have these three things, like I mentioned, SQL, Python, first step, second step, any public cloud, and the third thing is Databricks. I mean, not Databricks, Spark. But whenever in today's world, whenever I think of Spark, the first thing that comes to mind is Databricks. And with time, I think the way Databricks is growing and their services, it will help, if not now, after 2, 3 years.
It's very excellent insights, Bitthal. I think because I ask this question a lot to all my guests, and I really love how you're able to very clearly give very directed advice on, these are the three things you
Because this
definitely
is a
need.
very frequently asked question, Jan. If you would have asked me this question 2 years back, I would have, circled around multiple things. But now I even have a template ready. When people ask me, just copy and paste that. Okay.
Okay,
And
good.
if
Well, at least I think it's very very clear, and I'm also personally very happy to see that the sequel that I learned all those years ago is
Yeah, actually,
still
even in my
relevant.
work today, also, if I have to derive some insights and SQL, I am more comfortable. If I know something SQL can't handle, if I need to, because SQL can't do a for loop for me. It's a fact.
Yeah,
If I have to
correct.
repeat that stuff, I know that I have to choose a programming language.
Yeah,
So I used to do a lot of shell scripting in my past jobs. Okay, those help me now because if I have to do something repeatedly, I can just use a wrapper on top of that. So
yeah,
one programming language, one SQL, one cloud, and one Spark. That's it.
very very good.
And domain knowledge, they will gain as anybody. For example, if I am into healthcare, I gain this knowledge by working in the industry.
Yeah.
And if
Would
some
you say would you say that if you would have chosen, let's say, telco or banking, that you would now have the main knowledge around that? So
Yes,
is that
actually,
how you
I
grow?
never chose any industry. It was my luck that, when I joined Tata Consultancy Services, I was in their healthcare vertical. So I
Okay.
got to work with healthcare clients. So and I did work for Walmart and retail, but they also had some healthcare component. But if you ask me, healthcare knowledge in US is a different asset itself. Okay,
Yeah, correct.
because get to know about PBM industry, and if you see, a lot of companies are getting into this business: Amazon, Walmart, JP Morgan Chase. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's pretty much. If anybody wants to become a data engineer, domain knowledge will help, but you can't do much for it without working.
Yeah, I think it's a very excellent piece of advice. So, Bital, last question because we're slowly getting towards the end of our time.
Mhm.
What excites you most about the future of healthcare, data, and engineering? What is the main thing that you're looking forward to?
Okay, so it's a very broad, very broad question, but I'll ask you a counter question. So, do you remember 2020, 2021 when the COVID vaccine was developed? Did you ever
Yeah.
think how fast they were able to develop this? So,
Yes, absolutely. It was a miracle,
cloud
right?
computing had to play a major role. Okay, when these behind the scenes, when they had to use the infrastructure, nobody went and bought a Hadoop cluster in their company. What they did, everything they did on cloud. Okay, beat any
Yeah.
cloud. So what I see the future, more and more companies coming to cloud. Okay, because now we have proven results. We can identify patients, who are more likely to convert from a diabetic to a kidney patient. Okay, and that kidney patient, chronic kidney patient, cannot be reversed. They cannot go back from dialysis to a normal life.
Yeah.
So the impact that we can make using cloud, I'm not saying cloud itself can do anything. As data engineers, data analysts, or data scientists, the way we do our work with the help of cloud, being more agile, being more faster, will help us develop solutions which will reduce cost, increase accessibility. Like I mentioned, right, everything is now on mobile. Okay, even senior citizens who never used to call on phones, now they're on mobiles.
Mhm. Yeah.
And with the new solutions, the competition that has been created by Microsoft, Azure, Google Cloud, and AWS, they're coming up with new services. That is what excites me the most. That if AWS is doing something today, I know GCP won't be behind. Okay,
Yeah.
and I can use those skills and tools to have a positive impact on my patient. That's it.
That's yeah, it's a very I would say beautiful end because it's completely in line with why we are hosting this podcast around learning around how data is changing the way we live, and kind of very interested to see you say that through cloud, ultimately it helps make patients' lives better. Is
Absolutely.
that correct? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Good. Thanks so much, Bitthal, for being part of this show and of Big Data Talks today. I really loved listening to you. You're obviously very passionate around your work and very knowledgeable around all the different technologies that we talked about.
Yeah.
It also means that I would like to invite you for our next virtual conference. So, as you might have seen and might have read, we host this 2-day
Mhm.
event every year. It's still far away, so it's going to be May next year. But you're a very gifted speaker, and I would love to learn more from you and to also see what you're doing. So,
Thank you
hope you
so much,
will
Jan. I
accept my.
really appreciate, this is my first time I'm talking with somebody else. I did couple of podcasts on my own YouTube channel, but I never took it forward because that was meant to help somebody. But I really enjoyed talking to you and, sharing whatever I know. I like to tell everybody I don't know much, but whatever I know, I try to share it with the community.
Well, I
So
can say that you know a whole lot, and it's always
yeah, and
so
I've
great
been
to
very
see you.
fortunate to, work with a lot of best brains. So wherever I go, I'm the least smartest person. Very clear. Okay.
Well,
So
I
even
doubt whether that's
even
true,
in this
but
podcast, I'm the least smartest guy. Okay. So I did learn from you the way you manage this podcast. I know I did learn, and maybe in future I can use these skills.
thank you so much. Thanks for your time, and I'm quite sure we'll be in touch.
Sure. Thank you so much, Jan. Bye bye.